Once upon a time, there were two little boys and their mother, and they were in bad shape. Their father, who was a prophet, had been killed by wicked Jezebel, and they had borrowed money from a really mean man, and they'd used up all the money. They didn't have any meat. They didn't have any milk. They didn't have anything in the house but a little bitty pot with a little bitty bit of oil in it. And so they looked at their mother, and their mother looked at them, and they said, "What are we going to do?" And Mama said, "Well, we're going to go see Elisha. We're going to ask him what we should do." So they went off to see Elisha. And when they got to Elisha, they said, "Elisha, we're in big trouble. We've borrowed money from this really wicked man, and he came last night and said that if I didn't have the money to pay him, he was going to take my two little boys as slaves. And we don't have anything in the house." And Elisha said, "Oh, well, now let's think for a minute. You must have something. Something that you have. Think." And she said, "Well, we have a little bitty pot with a little bitty bit of oil in it, and that's it." Well, Elisha said, "I'll tell you what you should do. You go back home and you get all of the pots in your house. These are great big clay pots. Get great big clay pots and little pots and medium-sized pots in your house, and then go next door and knock on the houses of the neighbors and ask them for pots. And pretty soon, when you have the whole, and don't just gather a few, get as many as you can get. When the house is full of pots, then you take the little bitty pot down off the shelf and fill all those pots, and then come back and I'll tell you what to do." Well, on the way home, the little boy said, "Mother, what good is it going to do for us to take all those pots with a little bitty pot and just a little bitty bit of oil in it?" And Mother said, "I don't know, son, but that's what Elisha said to do, so that's what we're going to do." So they went home, and they gathered up big pots, and they gathered up little pots, and they gathered up long, skinny-necked pots, and they knocked on the doors of the neighbors, and pretty soon the whole house was filled with pots. So Mother went over to the cupboard, and very carefully she took down the little bitty pot with a little bitty bit of oil in it. And she said to the boys, "Go find me the smallest pot you can find." So they brought her one back that was only about this big, only about this high. And she said, "Okay, hold your breath." And she began to pour. Glug, 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 glug. And it was full. And they said, "But what about the little bitty pot?" Well, she said, "It's still got a little bitty bit of oil in it. So bring me a bigger pot." Well, this time they brought one that was about this big around, but it had a long, skinny neck on it. So it's going to sound different. Are you ready? She took the little pot. She said, "Hold your breath." And then she began to pour as carefully as she could. Glug, 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 glug. And the pot was full to the top. And the little boy said, "But what about the little bitty pot, Mom?" "Well, there's still a little bitty bit of oil left in it. So bring me a big one." So they brought her one, took both of them to carry it. A great, big, round, fat pot. Set it down in front of their mother. "Oh, it's going to take a lot of breath to fill this one. Are you ready?" She held the pot over the big pot and she began to pour. Glug, 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 glug. And it was full. And they said, "But what about the little bitty pot, Mom? Does it still have a little bitty bit of oil in it?" And she let them look. And when the boys looked, there was still a little bitty bit of oil in the little bitty pot. And they said, "Wow, let's go back and see what Elisha wants us to do with all of this." And so all the pots had been filled with oil. And Elisha said, "Now that you've filled all of the pots with oil, I want you to go knock on doors. And I want you to tell people to please buy your oil. And when they buy your oil, you'll have lots of money. And you'll have plenty to give back to the mean, wicked man. And you'll have money left to buy food." Well, the boys thought, "Oh, goodness, we haven't even had a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. We're tired from gathering up all those pots." No, that's not what the boys said. The boys knew the mean man was coming back that night, and they wanted to do whatever they had to do not to have to go off with him. So even though they were tired and even though they hadn't had anything to eat, they began knocking on doors and selling the oil, and pretty soon they had been all over their village and they had sold every single pot full of oil. They've still got the little bitty pot with a little bitty bit of oil in it left up in the cupboard, but they've got a pile of money on the kitchen table. Well, that night, sure enough, bang, 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 came the old mean man, and the little boy said, "We'll answer the door, Mama." And they opened the door with big smiles on their faces, and the mean man said, "Get your suitcases, you're coming with me. You're going to be slaves because you can't pay me." And the boys said, "No, we're not." And the man said, "Yes, you are." And they said, "No, we're not." "Yes, you are." "No, look." And they pointed to the kitchen table. And the mean man's eyes got as big as saucers, and he said, "Wow." Well, they filled his pockets with all of the money that they owed him, and he went away shaking his head, and there was still money left on the table so that they could buy food and bread and milk. God had taken care of them. But watch what happened, kids. Mama had to do what Elisha said to do, even though it sounded a little silly, didn't it? Just gathering a bunch of pots and pouring a little bitty bit of oil into all those pots. There's no way that could last. But she did what Elisha told her to do. And then the boys had to really work hard. But even with all of the work and even obeying Elisha, who had to be sure that they kept a little bitty bit of oil in the little bitty pot? Who did that? God did. That's right. And so that's the way it is with us. We have to obey. We have to work hard at trying to be good and doing what's right. And God supplies the rest because He supplies forgiveness when we don't do the things we should.